Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 450 chainsaw. Customer complaint is that it won't start. So, as with all my repairs, the first thing I usually do is look into the fuel tank. And that can tell you a lot right there about why the thing may or may not want to start. And in this case, everything looked normal in there. The fuel looked like it had oil in it. It smelled good. I could see the filter down in there was alright. So the next thing I usually do is look into the cylinder and make sure there's no scoring. And if you've been following these videos, you know this is my pattern. And the cylinder looks good here. I don't see any reasons why the cylinder would be a low compression kind of thing. I don't see any problems. Then I always check for spark. We're just going to lay the spark plug on top of the cylinder head and give the cord a couple pulls. I don't see any spark. So now we're going to try using an electronic device. I've showed this before on the channel. And it might be able to pick up whether or not there's current flowing through that spark plug wire or not. And it doesn't appear as though there is. So let's take the kill wire off the coil and see if that makes a difference. This will eliminate the possibility of the kill switch being the problem, or the wiring. And, there's a difference. It's not green though. It's telling me that the voltage is too low, there's a plug short, or the engine's flooded. Well, it's still not good. Now, a lot of people would just say, well, that means you need to buy a new ignition coil and put it in there. But there's one step you want to do before you just spend the money on a coil. You want to check the path from the coil to the engine. Make sure it's got a good ground. So in this case, I'm reading 1 ohm of resistance between the laminations of the coil and a cylinder head. That's too much. So let me just loosen and retighten one of the screws and try and create a better ground and see what number we come up with. Gotta wait for the meter to settle out, but we come up with 0.7 ohms. And really that's too much as well. But you need to check the resistance in your leads. And when I put the two, these are cheap leads I got on here, I come up with 0.6 ohms. Well, when I subtract the 0.6 from the 0.7, I have 0.1 ohm of resistance. And that's acceptable. I think Echo has a service bulletin out that says 0.2 ohms is acceptable. So now that I've fixed that ground, I got a green light flashing. So I should have spark. And just to confirm that, we're going to pull the plug out and lay it on the cylinder and try it again. And sure enough, I've got spark. So it looks like I'm a little fumbly with the spark plug. Where initially you might think that the ignition coil is bad and needs replacement, the fact of the matter is there's just a bad path back to ground. And you have to have that to complete the circuit in order for the plug to fire. Electricity follows the path of least resistance, and if you don't have a path, there's nothing to follow, right? So that's why we got to have that good ground. So we're just going to clean some of this mess up here. Yeah, it's pretty dirty. So now what I want to do is I'm going to remove that coil. We tested the problem, but now we're going to fix it really. I'm going to take the coil off of here and just sand the mounting pads on the cylinder and the laminated plate on the back of the coil. Get that stuff all cleaned up so we got a nice, decent connection there. Just using some emery paper here. I suppose you could use some kind of power sanding tool, I suppose, but I wouldn't get too carried away with removing material. We're shining it up. We'll start by getting the bulk of the schmutz off of there. So I guess the service bulletin that Echo put out was in response to them getting a lot of coils back from dealers on warranty claims that they've tested themselves and found out were actually good. So this testing of the ground is something that a lot of people kind of have been skipping. So we're going to get our air gap gauge. We're setting the gap between the ignition coil and the flywheel magnets. And you got to be a little bit careful when you're doing this. When you crank the screws down, you could end up turning and twisting the coil a little bit. And maybe you don't have an even gap all the way across. So every time I do this, I can tell already because that gauge came out so hard. I always recheck it. And it was pretty tight. So I've got a metal gauge that I like to use. I think this is an official Echo gauge. And yeah, it'll work on Huskies and Steels and everything else. So I'll crank it down with the metal gauge in place. And then I'm going to test it with the plastic gauge. And that drops right in there the way I want it. So we're happy about that. Okay. We got our kill wire on for the ground. But we're going to clean up some of that schmutz that's in there. Now we're putting our fan air conductor in place. Placing that blue kill wire in the slot provided for it. And we'll crank down the starter. We got a spare chain hanging on front here that the guy wanted sharpened. We're just going to get that out of the way in case this thing starts. So that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husky 450 ignition coil testing procedure. Thanks for watching. Later.